Hi, it's Llarold, and I'm going to talk about how to tank Brackenhide Hollow. But first, don't forget to like and subscribe. Okay, before we jump in, I'm going to do the same disclaimer as usual. This is the route and approach I like to use with pugs to make things easier for uncoordinated groups in which people are expected to make some kind of mistakes. This isn't necessarily the most optimal route in an organized group, but this isn't the MDI. That's fine. We're not trying to do any sort of skips or anything fancy at all. It's about making a W key route nice and easy. I used to say that this was for keys from +2 to +25, but with the key level squish with Season 4, I think it's more in the range of +2 to +12 or 13. In any case, if your group is good and well organized, you can get more aggressive with pulls, and you absolutely should, but if you're just, kind of slogging it out with a random group, this should work really well for you. Okay, let's get into it. We'll start with Bloodlust Timings. When do I think is the best time to Bloodlust in Brackenhide Hollow? You have a really long period of time before the first boss, like an extremely long period of time before the first boss. Lots and lots and lots of pulls. Just looking at it off the top of the dome here, I felt like it was about 7, and that is exactly what it is, about 7 pulls. So I would lust right off the start of the dungeon. Very first pull, do a great big pull in like 3 or 4 pulls worth of mobs, lust, everyone has their cooldowns, potion, all of that, blow that all up. And ultimately, yeah, the first boss is kind of hard. It would be nice to have lust for them, but it's just too much time between the start of the dungeon and getting to that first boss. But like to sit on lust. So just lust the first pull and then have it up either for the second boss, which is kind of a big bag of meat. It's not a bad idea to have lust for him. Or if it's a fortified week and things are going fairly well, when you're on the climb to the second boss, you can lust just one of the big pulls there, pull a lot of extra stuff in, really do a big pull with the lust, and then you can have it up for the final boss. Ultimately, the goal is to lust the final boss. That's really the key here. Try to fit in 3 bloodlusts if you can. If you're moving too quickly to fit in 3 bloodlusts, that's a really good thing. That's like suffering from success. So no problem with that either. All right, now let's take a look at the MDT route that I have pulled up here, and we'll just start with the first pull. As you can see, it's kind of a triple pull here. There are kind of just a couple little guys at the start, and then there's the cage with the guys over on the left-hand side. You have to open 5 cages with Tuskar in them. You got to set the meat free. There's this patrol that I like to pull in. Basically, I'll grab these first 2 guys, swing over to the left here, and then get a patrol. Sometimes these bad boys will get pulled in. Sometimes people will chain and all of this stuff. It's fine, just be prepared for it if it occurs. It's usually not a problem, but on bolstering week, it can kind of suck if people start chaining stuff together. You want to make your way to the second cage, come over here, clear this area out, open up that cage, and then I don't like to do this pull with the Bracken War Scourge. Those are probably the most important mob in this area. They have a couple of skills. They have a Rage Storm. It is actually an enrage effect, so druids can remove it, but really they just sort of stand still and do a whirlwind that's not a very long range. Like melee can outrange it. As long as you do step outside of it and outrange it, they actually just do nothing, so it's kind of better to let them sit in it. The more important skill that they have is Hideous Cackle, where they will blast the whole group with a fear. It's a pretty long cast, as you can see, 2.8 second base cast time. That's not including any sort of added cast speed slows. So it's pretty easy to get, but you do want to make sure you don't miss any of them, because a 4-second full group fear is probably going to be a wipe in any sort of decent sized pull. So you want to get those in every single pull that they're in, and they're in nearly every pull. So once you've come from the second guy, I like to run around into the water just a little bit to skip around this pull, get the third Tuskar guy, rescue him here with this little pull here, and then it's really easy, and I should probably just draw a little line here, really easy to just slide right in between these sets of pulls here. I do like to pick up this one Bracken War Scourge and fight it on the 4th cage, and then I come over here, and this patrol, depending on your timing, they may be walking away and far off, and that's actually better to just not do them and pick up a little bit of extra stuff later. But I often find that they are patrolling in as you're getting toward the end of this pull, this little 3 mob pull here at the final cage, and you're kind of better off just grabbing them intentionally. Now, the Decay Speakers aren't super dangerous on their own. They do summon a totem that you just kind of want to stomp, pretty basic, but they will just stand out at range and cast. So if you try to pull these guys while they're out at range, you do want to be prepared to interrupt that Decay Speaker But then you also want to keep an interrupt. Somebody in the group has to keep an interrupt for the Hideous Cackle from the War Scourge. Once you've done that, take care of the one pull in front of the boss. Then you kill the boss, and then you come up the right side and you basically just kind of chain pull through this whole area. You don't have to actually chain pull, especially if it's bolstering weak. You definitely don't want to do that. This is a dungeon, especially this section of it, that can kind of be difficult on Afflicted week. There's a lot of dispels available. There are these little cleansed rot vessels. If somebody in the group is an alchemist, they can activate these, and then people get a little flask, a little potion that they can use with their extra action button to take some diseases off. There are a lot of diseases in this area. These Decayed Elders will summon little guys to deal with. I believe it's the Shapers will apply Withering to people. That is a disease, so if you're on a tank that can dispel diseases, Monk, Paladin, you should help with that. But otherwise, you kind of just play through it. But if you have the alchemy flask potion thing, then yeah, you can use that as well to help with that disease. But basically, you're just kind of pulling your way up the hill, just trying to get up the hill to Treemouth. It will fork at one point. We don't want to have that mob in. It will fork at one point, and there will be this wilted oak over here. You don't have to get him. I actually kind of do prefer to skip him and actually grab these mobs. This is really more the approach that I take, is coming up this way. I actually skip this oak, and I will get these Rot Singers, these Elders, these bad boys, a bunch of goo, just kind of a bunch of little random crap mobs in this area. There's not really anything that's like super important and worth focusing on, other than just sort of the normal. There are casters, you want to interrupt their casts. Some of the guys will summon totems, you want to stomp the totems. The one big mob that really does anything that's kind of important is the Wilted Oak. He will cast Necrotic Breath and he will cast Stomp. So the Necrotic Breath will be pointed in a direction. You want to not be in that direction. You want to face the guy away, and so that he won't point it at the group. And then the Stomp, it's just basically a big circle. So you want to move out of that without moving into any of the stuff that you're not trying to pull. That can really be the biggest sort of added difficulty in this area, is people randomly running out of mechanics and into other stuff. You kind of want to keep people moving up and down in a straight line. Like they're coming up this way, and then if they have to dodge, don't dodge across the river, don't dodge forward, just dodge back in the way that you came that is safe, and then keep going up the hill. And eventually you'll get to the second boss, you kill him off, and then you come over to Stink Breath, who has been changed in this patch, who has actually been made into a pretty easy, pretty decent mob, and who you definitely should fight now. So his Stink Breath used to track with players, and there was no way to sidestep it if it was targeted on you. That's not how it works at all anymore. Now Stink Breath will lock position as soon as they start casting Stink Breath. You just sidestep it, and it's totally fine, totally easy. So everyone should still fan out, not be like in a straight line from Stink Breath in with anybody else in the group. But ultimately, as soon as that Stink Breath starts, everybody should just be prepared to immediately strafe out of it, not get hit by it, not get CC'd, not take a bunch of damage. And then other than that, he's a very easy guy, right? He just does a little whirlwind, very much like the Bracken, what are these guys called? Bracken War Scourge guys, like very much like that Rage Storm from those guys. Really easy to deal with, and he gives a lot of percent, 3.5%, which is pretty good. Even though these two guys here, these two skulking gut stabbers, they're stealthy boys, even though they're listed as being like right at the edge of the bridge in the MDT, they're actually a little bit further up, and so you can just hug right, as I've written a little note here, you can just hug right as you come across the bridge and jump up, and then just sort of like run and jump over, and then jump down between these two. You will skip these two guys, you will skip all of this trash in here, you will skip this trash, which is actually like quite a bit further down a ledge than it looks. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to come over here and pull this one pack with 4 hyenas, a ranger, a bear, and then there are these 2 vultures that fly around. If you're on a druid, they're pretty easy to pull. Most other tanks are usually a little bit out of range, so you might need a little bit of help with pulling them. But you want to get all of this stuff together, blow it away, and then move on to the third boss. As you can see, very brief bit of trash in between the second and third boss. Stink Breath, and then this one sort of triple pull, but really more like a double pull. Pretty basic. And then it's pretty much a straight line up the hill to the final boss. Now, depending on exactly how much percentage you've gotten, if you've gotten any extra along the way, maybe somebody accidentally ran into these two skulking gut stabbers, or they ran into some trees along the way up to the second boss, you may not need everything along the way to the final boss. It's okay to be over a little bit. It's not the end of the world if you're over by 1 or 2%. It's also actually not the end of the world if you're under by 1% or 2 as you get to the end, because there is a lot of stuff to pick up in the final boss's area. But ultimately, I like to do a double pull right at the bridge after fighting Gutshot. I like to just basically pull Filth Caller, and then all of the little teeny tiny guys, this patrol, this War Scourge, I like to pull it in with them, actually. And then I like to take on all of these casters and any remaining little bitty guys in the next pull, and then from there you can chain into these two Filth Callers and potentially do this Bracken War Scourge and these little Wither Biters. There is a little cauldron here underneath them that you can activate. It's not showing up, but that's fine. Oh, it's right here. Technically, I think they're a little bit closer to this. Doesn't matter. The point is that you can do these little guys. They're really not very dangerous, pretty easy to do, or, you know, if you don't need the percentage, you can skip right by them. They are very much over to the side. In any case, you finish up by coming up here, taking out kind of one pull, this one patrol, this other patrol, and then this pack that is right next to the final boss. Then you fight the final boss, kill her, and you're done. All right, now let's move on to talking about bosses, and we'll start with what I think is probably the hardest boss in here, and one of the harder bosses in this whole season of Mythic Plus, Hackclaw's Warband. This is a 3-boss fight. It is a council. You do have to kill each of them separately, and basically you do want to focus one, then the second, and then the third. So using Skull Marker or using the ping system to indicate, you know, attack this one first, and then when that one dies, attack the second, and so on. Like, using that to guide the group is really helpful. Trick Totem is by far the worst of these three, by far the worst. So it is the one that you want to focus down, then Gash Tooth, and then rear a Hackclaw. Trick Totem and Gash Tooth both have crowd control skills. Trick Totems is a trick totem that will CC people in the group, and so you really want to focus that totem down as like immediately. Touch of Death, any sort of cooldowns that you have to destroy that totem, those are crucial. Gash Tooth is a bit different. They basically throw like a bag of poop at the tank, and it is specifically at the tank. It is a CC. The healer will need to remove it. They will need to dispel it. It is a 15-second CC, so it is real bad. They need to get that off of you, and basically they need to do it instantly. And then that usually has a tendency to overlap with the exact same timing as Rhyra Hackclaw casting Savage Charge. Savage Charge puts out a great big red arrow, and she will run into the first target she hits and do a ton of physical damage to him. Not a problem as a tank. I've never been killed by this or had any issue at all. The only times that there have really ever been any problems are when I'm CC'd by the Decayed Senses. I don't get dispelled. Sometimes that can be bad on Affliction weeks, for example. And then this charge hits somebody other than me. As long as the Decayed Senses gets dispelled and you're able to step into that charge, you're going to be okay. You know, pop a cooldown if you feel you need to, that's fine, but generally speaking, you'll be fine. Now, there are some other skills as well. Rhyra does cast Cleave with all of her auto attacks, so you do want to face her and all of the bosses away from the group. I mean, that's standard operating procedure, really. She also has a Blade Storm. It's a Blade Storm. She slows down a lot, and then she slowly swaps between targets randomly and Blade Storms at them. You walk out of it, it's really not any more complicated than that, and frankly, as the tank, you have tank privilege, you can stand in it if you want to. I've never been killed by this. I'm not saying do it. Certainly, if you do it and die, don't complain to me, but if you feel comfortable, go for it. I am saying do it. Do it. Don't die, but do it. Gash Frenzy is probably the most dangerous mechanic left in this. I think the crowd controllers are the most dangerous, but of the damaging skills, Gash Frenzy is probably the worst. Gash Tooth will dash around and blast people over and over again with bleeds, and it's really just a big healing check, but if you're on a tank that can heal, Druid, Paladin, you want to help heal people. And that's because this fight has a lot of stacking damage bonuses. They have Prey on the Weak, where they gain haste, so more action speed, more damage as players lose health. But then they also have Blood Frenzy from Trick Totem, which increases everybody's health when they lose, or everybody's damage, I should say, all of the monsters' damage when they lose health. So you have multiple stacking buffs on these guys. They get more dangerous as the fight goes on. And so, like I said, real check on the healer, definitely useful to be using all of the defensive toolkit that you have, even just basic stuff like a well-timed rallying cry or a well-timed blessing of sacrifice can really just save the day. Finally, maybe the most important thing, I don't know why I saved it for last, but Trick Totem will cast Greater Healing Rapids. She really likes to cast that all the time, and that is the reason why you want to take them down first, is they basically try to spam cast a heal on the group, and if they get it off, it'll heal for a lot and also apply a very large and long heal over time. So, you know, if you're a Blood Elf or something, Demon Hunter, you can dispel that, but really just don't let them cast it. It's definitely a tough fight, but as soon as you get the first boss down, as soon as you get Trick Totem down, the fight difficulty reduces significantly. Once both Trick Totem and Gash Tooth are down, it's very easy. Totally soloable. You could totally take Rira Hackclaw down yourself if you have to. Alright, the second boss is Treemouth, and just like with Hackclaw's Warband, there is a frontal cone type of deal. You do want to face this boss away. I would say positioning is also really important. This is a boss that you move around a fair amount because he likes to summon little bitty ads. They are these things right here, decay spray. There's little blobs of goo, and when they die, they have a really nasty skill where, as you can see, when they die, they will do a bunch of damage in a very small area and then leave behind a pool of decay, and that pool of poop that they leave on the ground does a ton of damage, and it's actually kind of a bit larger than it might seem. Like, they're actually fairly sizable. So the boss's main mechanic that he does on the tank is Vine Whip. It is a frontal cone. It does a lot of damage, but it's physical, so it's really not very dangerous as long as it doesn't hit anyone else, but it is a knockback, and the boss sort of has a moat around his area, so you want to make sure that you never get knocked into the moat, out of the arena, anything like that. You also want to make sure that you never hit anybody with this knockback. And other than that, that's about all there is. This is not the main tank danger of the fight. This is just sort of the main tank mechanic. So once you've taken care of that, he's always faced away, you're not getting knocked out of the room, and you're picking up the ads. The boss will turn and puke on people. That's what spawns the ads. You're running over and scooping them up, helping stun and interrupt and kill them. And then you want to pull the boss as soon as you can. As soon as they're about to die, you want to start moving the boss's way. It's actually a good idea to move the boss a little bit early just so he doesn't camp in that spot, because he loves to cast Grasping Vines. He will stand still. He refuses to move. He will gulp everybody in the group toward him, and anybody who is within 10 yards of him when he finishes that gulp will get gobbled up. It just needs to be you. It just needs to be the tank. It should be you, though. It should be the tank. The gobbling, the consume will do a lot of damage. It does it all as spell damage, so spell reflection's good. Spell warding is great. He does have some weird threat issues where even if you have Final Stand as a paladin, if you Divine Shield while you're in his stomach, he will start auto attacking people, so you don't want to do that. But you do want to use major defensive cooldowns because it does a lot of damage. He will shield himself, and then you have to either break the shield or wait out the duration of the consume. Obviously, it's better to break the shield. Everybody should just be DPSing the boss, burning the shield and breaking it so that he will spit that person out early. Once you're spit out, you take triple damage from the consume. So the intended design, the intended mechanic of this fight is for the tank to take the first one, somebody else to take the second, tank to take the third, and so on back and forth. I have never done it like this even one single time. I always take it every single time. It's sort of a tank privilege thing. Now, maybe if you're pushing at a high enough key level, maybe you will reach the point where that's not the case, where you do have to actually rotate. But I think more likely, if you're really pushing to a super high key level, I think it's much more likely that an unbuffed digest like the consume would kill some non-tank. So I think the go-to plan, the strategy you should always approach this with is just, I'm the tank, I will take the first one, I don't need a major cooldown for the first one, and then for everyone after that, I need a big boy cooldown. I really gotta throw on the damage reduction for this consume, make sure everybody's breaking it out early, breaking it out quickly, and that's pretty much it. And just to kind of make sure I don't miss anything here, if he doesn't eat anybody, if for some reason you're not in it and everybody else is also not in it, he will massively increase all of his damage and he will pretty likely wipe you. Other than that, there really isn't all that much left in this fight. You do want to make sure that the gushing slimes aren't able to cast, because they will deal a lot of group damage if they are able to get their cast off. Just any sort of CCs really help here. Leg sweeps, stuns, that kind of thing are best. Silences are great, but just any sort of CC is important. One thing I want to make sure that I absolutely get in clear, though, is the pools that these little guys leave on the ground deal a ton of damage, and because the boss refuses to move once he starts his grasping vines, you want to make sure that you are moving him away from the little blobs as they're dying, so that he doesn't stand still in a pile of goo and then suck you in and eat you and do damage to you, both with eating you and with keeping you in the pools. That is the reason that you want to move the boss away from the blobs as they are dying. Gutshot is the third boss of this dungeon, and she's kind of interesting because I think she's supposed to be the tank fight, and I think if you do it poorly, she can be kind of rough on tanks, but I think generally speaking of the three fights, she's definitely the least annoying and maybe the least dangerous to the tank. So her main tank mechanic is Gutshot, which you would think that's a frontal cone, but it isn't. She just blasts you and knocks you back and does a lot of damage, but it is physical, so it's pretty easy to mitigate. Her real mechanic is that she throws down traps on the ground that will root. She's basically just a hunter. She throws down like bear traps on the ground, they root and do a ton of damage, and she summons hyenas. So what you want to do is you want to get threat on the hyenas, kite them into the traps, make sure that you don't get knocked back into any traps or off the platform or anywhere bad. And that's pretty much all there is to it. If she tries to, or if the hyenas are in a trap, she will try to cast Master's Call, and that will give the hyenas move speed and make them immune to slow, stun, snare, whatever. You want to just interrupt that. It's really all that there is to it. She's basically just a hunter. You want to move her around the room, picking up all the hyenas as they keep spawning in, kiting them into traps. You can knock them into traps as well. Typhoon, Ring of Peace, that also works really, really well. Cleave them down. The main thing you want to be sure of your melee is that while the mobs are rooted, they will have a threat table. They will just attack people who are nearby them. So you don't want to be hanging out in melee range with the wolves, or they will absolutely destroy people. They are pretty dangerous to you too. They cast this skill Crippling Bite. It does a bleed. It does a 50% mortal strike. It does 50% move speed reduction. It lasts for 10 seconds. It's absolutely nasty. So you really do want to absolutely shred these hyenas. And the best way to do that is just to trap them and then interrupt the boss's Master's Call and just sort of kind of cleave them down from range. Pretty simple boss in the end, I think. Decatriarch Wratheye is the final boss, and she is a boss that is like really easy if you manage all the mechanics correctly, and brutally difficult if you do her wrong. So her main mechanic for the tank is Decay Strike. She hits you 2 times in a row with a big physical hit, and it also applies a Healing Absorb. That Healing Absorb stacks, so you really just want to, as soon as you get hit, it's physical damage, so it really doesn't hit for all that hard. It's pretty easy to mitigate, but it's Mythic Plus, it's infinitely scaling content, so eventually it will hit hard. But what you want to do is you want to just blast yourself with healing as soon as she casts the Decay Strike. That is really more important than even getting like defensive cooldowns up. Not that a moderate one would be like a bad idea. Bark Skin, Eye of Tear, medium style cooldowns for Decay Strike are good, but really I think the auto attacks that come afterward when you're healing absorbed are more of an issue. She casts a lot of group focused stuff. She casts Choking Rot Cloud. That's the real danger of this fight. She will take like a second or two to cast, and then she will barf out a cloud of rot, really, and it will rotate around the room clockwise. It will immediately make its way out to the edge from wherever she's standing, so you want to just pull her to the edge in the first place and point her toward the outside of the room. As soon as she casts Choking Rot Cloud, you want to run behind her or run to her side so that it doesn't hit you, because it will pass through you and it will debuff you, and that debuff, Withering Rot, reduces your damage done until she consumes it with her next Decaying Strength cast, but it'll make her stronger, it'll make you do less damage, it'll make you take damage. You don't want to get hit by it. I got hit by it like on the pole in my latest kill. You can see in real time as I remember how to do this fight during the kill. Her other mechanic is Rot Burst Totem. Rot Burst Totems do a Rot Burst cast, right? They do a bunch of damage to the group. So the way that the boss works, the way you want to deal with this is as soon as she starts to cast Choking Rot Cloud, you run straight through her and you pull her to the opposite side of the room from the cloud. And you want to rotate her around the room at the same time and at the same speed as the cloud, so she's always on the opposite side until she casts Rot Burst Totem. When she casts the Rot Burst Totem, she will cast it on the opposite side of the room from her, so directly in the middle of the cloud. This is ideal because it takes her a second to actually cast it and for it to spawn. So when she casts it, if it's spawning right in the middle of the cloud, by the time a second has passed, the cloud will have moved away. So the cloud will have just left, the totem will be right there. You will have the maximum possible amount of time to burn down that totem before the cloud gets back there to it. This is why the positioning in this fight is so vitally important. If you tried to like keep the boss right on the heels of the cloud, then she would be summoning the totem in such a way that the cloud would then pass through it while you're still DPSing. You don't want that. You really want her to be exactly on the opposite side of the room, so she's dropping the cloud, dropping the totem right into the middle of the cloud, and then it's passing through and everybody's able to jump on it all as it spawns. The only other real mechanic of the fight is Decaying Strength. She will do a big cast, it does damage to everybody in the group. You just spread out. You can kind of use cooldowns, frankly, more to mitigate this than to mitigate her tank strike. The Decay Strike, that really is not as damaging as the Decaying Strength, the Withered Eruption cast. And she will give herself a stacking damage buff that falls off slowly. Decaying Strength, it literally is what it sounds like. It is a strength buff that decays. So having a cooldown going for that big combo and then having it there to kind of cover as she has a bunch more damage initially and then that steadily falls off, that's like a perfect time on when you would want to use your cooldowns. In general, I think that this fight is much more oriented on, as long as you've done the positioning correctly, I think that this fight is oriented much more toward the healer, them just keeping up with all of the rot, all of the group damage that's occurring, and the big Decaying Strength explosions. Other than that, I think it's a pretty simple tank fight, but it does have that like crucial pass-fail mechanic of, are you positioning the boss in the correct way or not? If yes, it's going to be a nice, easy time for you. If no, it's going to be a nightmare. All right, so that is how you take Brackenhide Hollow. Feel free to ask any questions if you have any, and good luck. Thanks for watching. Bye.